shortly after making the last video, two things happened. The first one was that the 3,500 pounds per square inch hand pump became 4,500 square pounds out of Podang, China, a suburb of Shanghai. The second thing was that I weakly said, oh, maybe you could pressurize the frame itself because it's carbon fiber, like the new bottles, right? The new high-pressure bottle. And I didn't realize how right it was, you know. It became obvious to me that with 4,500 pounds per pressure, you don't want to have separate bottles because, you know, it's the strongest thing you've got, much stronger than the frame I have now. So it means I have to restart and rebuild the whole thing because the frame is pretty fundamental. So in the meantime, to demonstrate to you, here's a fire extinguisher. Average size bottle, medium size, 2 liters. Here's a 3.5 liter one, a 4 liter one, a 10 liter one. This is the one that I made thinking of the new frame. You see how I have it coming out the side? But I didn't make it long enough. It could be made longer. This is 6 inches interior diameter. And is right for the small vehicles, right? So that's a prototype. So then someone had the idea of public transportation, trucks and buses and so on. So I made this big one, 10 inches in diameter, and got the first regulator, 4,500 pound regulator, which if you can do a close-up there, you see it? It says 4,500 pounds on there. Anyway, they didn't print it very big. Anyway, the point is, here's the gauge. How did they do it? You know, here's the gauge, and it's real small. It's tiny, right? You know, here's the gauge, for instance, on the 500 pound per square inch average fire extinguisher, right? Because metal is dangerous. If it explodes, it turns into shrapnel, as they pointed out. So what I put in this one was a safety feature. I marked it by a line, so I left a layer or two up because there's several layers in there, both 3K and 12K. There's no Kelvar, and you should have Kelvar. And industrial, they'll use a spinner or they'll use a rubber thing in the inside and then inflate it to push the thing out, the material out. So, you know, this means that when you put it in, it'll be down and toward the outside. So if there's a rupture in an accident, it'll sort of lift your vehicle and almost protect it like an airbag. So that's the bottles that don't leak. Well, batteries do leak, and that should finish the limited range electric car for good, right? Now we have to finish the fuel car. So I made a circuit because if your ultracapacitors that you need as a mediator between the generators driven by the air from the bottles, you know, to the control boxes of the magnetic drives, if they leak, you know, what do you gain, right? So this is a non-leaking ultracapacitor layout circuit. And the key here is that you have parallel circuits going in to each 12-volt unit. Here's 3 for 36, 4 for 48, and 5 for 60. And I even put in a little that don't exist yet for 72 because they'll probably add one later. Meanwhile, you have the output going through voltage regulators, and the voltage regulators are put in series. So you have additive things. And you have your electronic connection to your EPAD that can switch on and off between the 36, the 48, and the 60. So I even put in a couple of smoothing capacitors here that will recirculate the extra energy endlessly and whatnot and whatnot. And there's 2 points I'd like to make. First of all, I bought one of the big units, 48-volt units from Maxwell of ultracapacitors, and I actually ran 10 miles on it, right, on one charge. But it was a nightmare trying to put in 20 amp charging things, and the balancers were leaking. So that was where the leaks come. That was made for the buses in Shanghai and Chicago and a few even in Detroit back in the late 90s and early, and so you don't want that. But recently a video has come on YouTube showing people that are a guy who's tossed out his starter battery for his car, 12-volt heavy lead battery, and put in ultra capacitor. So he's basically built one of these units, and he's got diagrams of it and so on and so forth. So you should look it up and just add on it and wire it like that. So, it cuts the charging amperage down to 4 amps, which is well within range of your generators, right? And you can use the standard 12-volt voltage regulators because it's really hard to find anything else, right? And more expensive. And their goal is to have a cheap, zero pollution powered vehicles with unlimited cost-free range that you can leave indefinitely without deterioration. Leaks in the power system, like happens to batteries in wheelchair operations, among other things. And the key to that is hand pumping. Because if you use a city gas station to pump it up with a new kind of fangled high-pressure generator, compressor, they're going to charge you money for that, right? And it won't be free. And getting rid of the rust by having a completely ferrous metal-free vehicle. Note that I put in a couple of extra cells to have an overload capacity. You see what I mean? So it'll hold like maybe 2 farads at 18 volts instead of 12, because there will be some fluctuations, and they could be defrayed over the 3 and the 4 and the 5. But you should have a little margin there. Okay, so I made a sketch here of a new kind of turbine that will be run by your called the breath turbine, the living breath dual turbine. So it's like the human breath. When the stored energy in the bottles, when you push it to the turning wheel, that's levitated, by the way, it's the breathing out. And when you build velocity and your vehicle starts going 15, 20 miles per hour, around 18, the air pressure is compressed and you're breathing in. And what they're going to try and do is have electric pumps for city things and only have breathing out. And it's going to be limited range, and it's going to be using old metal, ferrous metal, so there'll be rust, interruption of the magnets, and so on and so forth. It isn't the solution. This yin-yang, because the yin is the breathing in and the yang is the breathing out, right, are like the Tai Chi, the Tao, the yin-yang, the yoga of mind cessation through concentration on the holy name, which is letting your breath, join the universal harmony of change, and so on. So what this does, this kind of a turbine, is unite the cultures of India, which are heavy on the time thing and yoga, and China, which is evolved a symbol in their book of changes and so on, of space. So it's time and space. India and China together can develop this technology. But the point is that the air pressure difference is what gives it its power. Not just the air pressure coming out, but if it hits a vacuum, if there's a vacuum behind it, it increases the turning power. So I've shown here how you compress it, and as I did that through the Venturi tube, of which, by the way, your nostril. The alien people who use this on their planets are very biological in their scientific thinking. I mean, the biology is much more complex than any machines that have been built on Earth or electronics. So you have one on each side. So it's actually like 2 nostrils, having these things turning the generators. So, on the other side, after it gives its maximum pressure by compressing, it has a block here, it expands, as they depressurize, and then as it goes backward, it leaves behind the air, right? The air escapes out the back, and as the pressure comes in behind it, it creates in the turbulence, this is the dynamics of fluids, a partial vacuum. So you have the maximum difference when it like kinetically involves. So when you start out, you turn this on, the breath out, until you reach 18, 15 miles per hour, and then you turn that off, and this is now, the breathing in is now driving it. So it's in, on, off, right? In stop and go parking. So I made a sketch here, and this shows the magnets that levitate, and that's common on the internet. You can see different kinds and the different problems they have. And how we resolved the problems, the electronics people, was by having a 0-point stabilizer. And this stabilizer, this is like a 1 millimeter hole, right, that keeps it steady. If it's wandering, it'll make more friction. But if it's right on, in other words, you put it on after the whole thing's loaded on both ends, right, and you put a strong upright to hold it, then it will keep it from bouncing around as you hit bumps and so on and so forth without creating more friction. And here I tried to picture these because the one I made years ago is like a spiral and straight ones, but they should be made of thermoplastic, like a baseball mitt, because they concentrate the energy and keep the compression going as they go into what could be considered cylinders. The Wankel type engine have 3 cylinders through that triangle, and people have been making cross-ones with 4 cylinders. This has 12 virtual cylinders once you put these compressors here, or 18, And as a matter of fact, up to 60 volts, 18-inch in diameter will go up to like 1,700 revolutions per minute and generate 65 volts or something. But if you switch it to 72, conversely, like the miniaturization there with the higher pressure, you'll have to reduce it through optimization of the magnets and so on and so forth, and the molds and so on, efficiencies to 16 inches or so to reach 2,000, 2,200 revolutions. That fans, the bigger the fan, usually the smaller it moves, So I put in the tire there, and this is interesting because, you want tires that only make the minimum contact in order to have things. And they're being made 3-inch tires, and a 20-inch wheel is minimal. Otherwise, potholes and whatnot can really knock you out, right? So, that's the kind of wheel you use, and it's a little bigger. And you'll notice that there's no axles to the front wheels. They steer, but they're like a snowmobile and off-road vehicle ones, they're independently suspended. The axle has been transferred to the generators a few inches away. So here it shows the outflow from the pressurized tank. Here's the pressurized tank built into the frame. I could have put dotted lines that went up, but I didn't want to go into all of that frame stuff. So I have a couple of comments on it. It's a hand pump which affects the demographic change and will restore the balance between food producers and food consumers. And this has already happened on other planets, and that's why our space probes are seeing like grapevine kind of spider web villages and different kinds of things on other planets, and not megacities and deserted landscape like our fuel planet so far. And people are ask me, can it be speeded up? This is obviously a city person asking, right? And can you use foot power to speed it up? Well, say it takes 20 minutes. Well, 20 minutes in the city, I got an appointment with the dentist, forget it, or I got to pick up the baby, But in the country, time slows down. And jobs and rewards lessen You know, what you can produce in an hour is less, but the muscles are stronger, and the time is less a premium. It's more enjoyable. Nature time, insects, birds, everything, more appreciation of what other life forms happen. So you don't mind 20 minutes or even 30 minutes, right? The idea of not having to pay for gas and not have to pay for refilling your pressurized cylinders makes up for that. You know, they will prefer it, and this will lead to a balance between the workers and the peasants. You know, otherwise, here's the danger. Reliance on stored energy alone results in limited range, city use only, continued rust, wars, fiat money inflation, demographic imbalance, and physical imbalances, by the way, of the bodies themselves, and social imbalances, and continuing planetary quarantine. And this is an important one because dozens of planets are now mining complex polymers on the moons of Saturn and the moons of Jupiter. They've been reporting some of this stuff, and other moons too, to a lesser extent. So, you know, spending your time making guns and whatnot is the very thing that keeps us in quarantine. You know, using fuel and exploring for is the very thing that's keeping this planet isolated and in the dark, right? Well, all this is unnecessary, you know. This will triple the planetary potential by developing the countryside, you know, with minimal resources and so on, you know, making maximal production. And it will release us to the system so that, because metal is weak. Everybody's been thinking of metal, oh, swords, guns, you know, it's strong. Metal is the strongest. No, they stopped using metal because for the containers, because if they explode, they turn into hand grenades, you know, above 1,000, even at 500, 800, right? And now you've got 4,500 pounds per square inch with carbon fiber and plastics, right? It's because metal only crystallizes. It doesn't polymerize, you know. So we're turning from a metal planet into a polymer planet, a sandwich panel. People got to appreciate that's a sandwich panel. Sandwich panels mean that you use different materials together and adhesives which have different properties that reinforce each other for the specific purpose. You've seen it used with insulation on roofs, like factory-made panels that are 12 inches thick or something, or 8 inches thick, and you put them in 3 feet by 6 feet between beams and so on. That's a sandwich panel. There's adhesives. This is in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. It keeps, and this is the bottles are an important breakthrough that have recently happened, you know, and would have happened longer ago if the military hadn't been in charge of research and development. Which, by the way, this is my 50th year in RID, Research, Invention, and Development, which is getting rid of obsolete technologies. And this is the key one